How's it going, you awesome bunch of bakers? I hope you're having a great day so far. In today's video, I have another awesome addition to the brioche playlist. So let's go to the kitchen and get started. Brioche is one of the most versatile types of dough ever created. You can use it to make pretty much anything, and you can find plenty of great examples of that fact in the brioche playlist on my channel. And now that we can make this dough with the no-knead method, the process has become way easier. This brioche cake recipe has been adapted from the second edition of Jeffrey Hamelman's book, Bread, a baker's book of techniques and recipes. It is by far the best bread making book I've ever read, and most of the base of my knowledge comes from that book. So I would highly recommend it for any bread making enthusiasts out there. But let's get back to the recipe for a second. It's made up of a super light brioche base, topped with a cream cheese layer, fresh berries, and a crumbly streusel to finish. Let's start with the ingredients for the dough. We'll need some white bread flour, yeast, salt, sugar, softened butter, and eggs. Unlike my previous no-knead brioche recipe, this one has double the ingredients. But to make the cake, you only need half of the dough. I decided to make a double batch, so I can use the other half for another project. So if you want to, you can halve the recipe for the dough. The process will be almost exactly the same, except one adjustment, which I'll explain later. Onto the equipment, we'll need a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe, a fine grater for lemon zest, and we'll need a rolling pin and a whisk. The whisk is the perfect tool for no-knead bread making, and specifically for this recipe, it is essential. Okay, next up we'll need something to bake this cake in. I'm using my large round springform cake tin. I've placed it over a baking tray because mine doesn't have a bottom, and I have lined the bottom and the sides with paper to prevent any stickage. This cake ring measures at around 24 centimeters or 9.5 inches in diameter, and you could certainly bake this in a square or rectangular tray. Okay, let's get to it. First things first, temperature control. My kitchen is pretty hot at around 27 degrees Celsius or 80 degrees Fahrenheit, so I want my eggs to be on the cooler side. Now if you had watched my recent temperature control video, you may think that these eggs are too cold. But remember that the softened butter in this recipe makes up a significant amount of the dough, so it will help raise the temperature. Right, so in a large bowl, combine the eggs, the yeast, the salt and the sugar. Then give it all good whisking. You want to dissolve the salt and sugar completely. If you are using active dry yeast, I would suggest letting the mix sit for around 10 minutes after you whisked it up before adding the flour. This will give the yeast some time to hydrate and activate properly. Okay, the next step is to add 8 tablespoons of flour. If you're making half the recipe, you should add only 4 tablespoons of flour, of course. Whisk in the flour until the mix is nice and smooth, and then continue by adding the butter. Doing it this way prevents the butter from splitting. It helps us with distributing the butter evenly throughout the dough. As of yet, this is the best method I've found for adding large amounts of butter to no-knead dough. I'm sure some of you will say, why not melt the butter? And I would say that could make it too warm, and anyway, it's soft enough at room temperature, especially in summer. Now if it's very cold in your kitchen, you may want to melt it, but do let it cool down a bit before you use it. Okay, so after adding the remaining flour, grab your scraper and mix this to a dough. Mix until there's no dry flour left. It'll be pretty sticky and messy, so use wet hands when handling it. And just look at this dough, it's so loose, it has no structure. Let's get it in a clean bowl and take its temperature, see where we're at. We were aiming for around 24 to 25 degrees Celsius. Which is 75 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. If your dough is above this temperature, you should refrigerate it right away. But if the temperature is correct, leave it out at room temperature, cover it up, leave it to rest for 20 minutes. In order to build up the gluten in this dough, we'll need to fold it a few times. In a no-knead bread recipe, folding replaces kneading. You can find a full no-knead guide in the Principles of Baking playlist. Any bread recipe can be made using this method. Okay, to give the dough the first fold, dust it with flour, pop it out on the table with the smooth side down, then stretch it over the middle, going around in a circle, and this time go around a couple times because this dough is very stretchy. Finally flip it smooth side up, round it against the table, pop it back into the bowl, and now you can start chilling it down. And we are still going to keep the 20-minute interval between folds. So take the dough out of the fridge after 20 minutes of chilling and perform the second fold. This time you're not going to need any flour. As you can see, this dough is not sticky at all. The second fold is performed exactly the same as the first one. And after rounding the dough, pop it back into the bowl, cover it up and chill it down for 20 minutes again. And after the second chilling stage, you can perform the third fold. And you may say, that's a lot of folding, but remember, this dough is 40% butter and all the liquid is eggs. We should be lucky this is even possible. Okay, after the third fold, pop the dough back into the fridge for 20 minutes yet again. This was the final chilling stage. Now, if you have made the whole recipe, weigh the dough and divide it in half. As I said earlier, I'm using one half for this cake and another half for another project. But if you only made half the dough, then instead of dividing it, simply give the dough another fold, which will be fold number 4. Here I'm shaping the divided pieces of dough into balls, which is also like giving the dough a 4th fold. So basically, no matter what you do, you want to give this dough 4 folds in total. But that's about all we need to do to make this brioche based dough. From here it goes into cold fermentation, and then on the next day you can use it for any project that you like. We'll pop these bad boys in the fridge for around 24 hours. Okay, on the next day, before you start baking, get all the ingredients together to finish this recipe. For the cream cheese layer, we'll need some cream cheese, sugar, an egg, vanilla paste, lemon zest, a little bit of flour. For the streusel topping, we'll need some flour, butter and sugar, and we'll need some berries. I'm using raspberries, but you can use any berries that you like. Or you can use some fruit. Just make sure they're not too juicy, as it can make the cake too wet. Okay, let's start by making the crumble. Combine the flour and the sugar. Give it a quick mix and then add the butter. Make sure the butter is cold. Coat the pieces of butter in flour and then break them up into smaller pieces. Keep coating those smaller pieces and breaking them up even further. Keep doing this until the crumble is nice and uniform and resembles wet sand. And of course you can do all these jobs while the dough is final proofing. I wasn't ready to bake yet, but I wanted to get these jobs out of the way first. You could make the streusel topping several days ahead of time if you wanted to. Just cover it up and keep it in the fridge. Same goes with the cream cheese layer. You can make it 2 or 3 days before, and there's not much to it. In a small bowl, combine the sugar, the lemon zest, the flour, give it a quick mix, then add the egg, the vanilla paste, and the cream cheese. Then mix it all until it's nice and smooth. I don't know why I thought using a spatula would be a good idea here. Halfway through the process I realized that the whisk will do a much better job at this. So I'll suggest using a whisk from the get-go. Okay, now that's done, let's leave it on the side. We can continue with the dough. And just look at this thing, it has puffed up beautifully. And if you're not ready to bake it, you can easily leave this dough in the fridge for 48 hours, even 36 hours. It will start tasting more intense over time, but it can definitely take some fermentation. Okay, so to shape the dough, dust it with flour generously, flatten it out by hand, and then continue by rolling it with the rolling pin. Roll it out nice and evenly until it's slightly larger than a cake ring. Place it on a non-stick paper lined tray, make sure it's nice and round, adjust it if need be. Now take the cake ring, open it up, and set it down over the dough. If your cake ring doesn't open like this, then just wiggle it on there. Next up, line the sides with paper. This will prevent any sticky situations. Next, clamp the ring shut, then just do some final adjustments. Press the dough down, make sure it fits the ring properly. And this is all it took to get it ready for final proofing. Cover it up and leave it to rise. My kitchen is still pretty hot at 27 degrees Celsius or 80 degrees Fahrenheit, but even in this heat, the dough will take around 2 hours to rise. During the final hour of fermentation, preheat the oven, 180 degrees Celsius, 355 Fahrenheit, fan on. Because the dough is so flat, it's quite hard to tell when it's fully risen. But there's a couple things you can look for. The dough should look and feel very delicate. It shouldn't take much force to leave a fingerprint in it. It should feel quite light and fragile. The dough has a sloping edge around the outside, which is also a good indication of proof. But we need to get rid of it for our filling not to run off. So using your fingers, press the sides of the dough against the cake ring. This way we'll create a little lip that will catch the cream cheese filling. Now take the filling and spoon it all over the surface. Spread it out nice and evenly. It is quite runny, so it will find its own way really. Next up come the berries. The raspberries need to be cut in half for them to cover the whole surface. I'm going to place them with the cut side facing up. The cream cheese is wet. I don't want to make it any wetter by adding raspberry juice. I want the raspberry juice to soak in the dry crumble topping. Or at least that's how it works in my head. That is the last step. Take the crumble topping and sprinkle it in an even layer all over the surface, and then straighten it out by hand if need be. Okay, this bad boy is finally ready for the oven, so let's pop it in there. It'll take around 35 to 40 minutes to fully bake. It should be well puffed up and nicely golden brown on the surface. And just look at it rising, it's huge. Remember that we're only using half a kilo of dough to create this massive cake. As soon as the crumble has browned nicely, it's ready. Things like these, they are pretty fragile once you take them out of the oven, so it's best to let them sit for a few minutes before doing anything else. So leave it to rest for at least 15 minutes before removing it from the tin. And because we used the non-stick paper, it should come out pretty easily. But there you have it. That's how you make a brioche-based raspberry crumble cake. There was no kneading, no mess, and the hands-on time was minimal. You can of course make this on the same day. Simply let the dough double in size before rolling it out and leaving it for the final proof. The bulk fermentation at room temperature should take around 2.5 hours. But no matter what you do, this is what you're gonna get. It's a thing of beauty. but I must add, this will be best on the day of baking, so don't try to store it, it will go dry. So what do you think of this brioche recipe? Did you know that brioche dough can be this versatile? Let me know down in the comments. If you want some more videos like this one, click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.